Good morning and welcome to Sales TV, where we tackle the reality that there is no easy button in sales. If you're an account executive or customer success representative striving to build relationships and pipeline while navigating the challenges of modern sales, then you're in the right place. In every episode, we explore the one thing that brings you closer to achieving success without stress. I'm thrilled to host Michael Pearson this morning, a seasoned procurement specialist with a wealth of knowledge and experience in navigating the often challenging world of corporate procurement. Michael's expertise has guided countless sales teams to engage effectively with the procurement function, transforming what many see as a hurdle into an opportunity for success. Now, Michael is here to shed light on what procurement professionals truly value and how sales teams can build consensus with this critical stakeholder group. From understanding procurement and their motivations, knowing the do's and the don'ts at every stage, from initial contact to negotiation, Michael will provide practical insights to help you elevate your sales game. So please join me in welcoming a true expert when it comes to procurement. Welcome, Michael. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Alex. Delighted to be here.
So how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well.
Good. So to kick things off, can you share the story behind, why inside the procurement mind? What led you to this point?
A few years ago, as a favour to a couple of sales account managers that I was dealing with, I offered to go in and talk to their teams about what it's like on the other side of the fence. And the sessions were great fun to do, really well received. I was told they got great value out of it, and hence the idea of Inside the Procurement Mind was born.
Wow. Now, when we first spoke to prepare for this session, I found it really quite interesting that you were offering this kind of training to salespeople because, from my perspective as a salesperson, the last person or stakeholder that I really wanted to engage with was procurement. Never really knowing how much they cared about getting the deal done. And so what does procurement really care about when it comes to a deal, managing a deal?
Well, of course, they want the same as their business stakeholder. And the business or the business stakeholder is a phrase I use quite a lot, but it could be IT, HR, marketing, whoever we're working alongside. Obviously, their aim is to get the right products or service for the organization that's within their budget. Procurement will share that aim, but we'll be coming at it, I guess, with a different angle and slightly different concerns. So the business stakeholder primarily is concerned they're getting the right product because they are accountable for that product or service to their organization. It's their budget, they're the SME. The procurement person is going to have different objectives. We want to make sure that there's been, for example, a robust review of the market, and we're not just going with the first salesman that got in through the door. We want to make sure that we are paying, I'm going to call it the right price, not necessarily the lowest price. So have we looked at the market and decided, can we stand up and say, yes, we are paying a fair market price here? Having said we don't want to get the lowest price, I make no bones about the fact, and we'll talk about negotiation later on, I want to make sure I've got your lowest price that's possible. And then finally, I want to make sure that we've got a robust contract with the right SLAs, the right levers, and so on. So as you can see, although we're aligned with the business stakeholder, it's a slightly different lens that procurement are bringing to the whole sales process.
Yeah. And in my experience, procurement either comes in at the end, because the business stakeholder has said, right, now you need to convince procurement or work with procurement. And it's like, oh God, every salesperson's worst nightmare. Yep. Or you're at the beginning where you're kind of managing the whole process end to end. And then it becomes actually don't speak to many business stakeholders. And so again, that's almost a salesperson's worst nightmare if they're not on the inside, if they've not been privy to helping to craft those requirements. Let's kind of dig into that former one first. What is it that is the deal in your mind when that happens? The salesperson has spent perhaps many months speaking to business stakeholders, and then they have to speak to procurement. In procurement's mind, is the deal really done and it's a tick box exercise, or are you actually thinking, no, this could be any one of the shortlist?
Well, we certainly would like to think we're not just there to tick the box.
Yeah.
It's one of the biggest complaints within the procurement world is being brought in late by our stakeholders. And we all work within our business to sell our value and to try and make sure that we're involved right up front. But we know that's not always the case. I think from a salesman's point of view, you're right. I'm well aware that when they hear the P word, their heart sinks. And I think they probably think in many cases, well, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. I really would advise, well, first of all, and I'm sure most salespeople do this, make sure you find out, are procurement going to be involved? I also think it's very important to subtly try and find out from the business, what is procurement's role? How influential are they, dare I say? Because there can be extremes. In some cases, yeah, they're just there to sort of tick the box. I hate to say it. In other cases, they are extremely influential. So I would encourage salespeople to find that out. The other thing I would say is, as soon as you hear that there is going to be procurement involvement, my strong advice would be to make proactive contact.
Right.
I think, first of all, because you're going to find out a little bit more about the process that might need to be followed, it allows you to at least start to build that rapport and connection with procurement, who I have to warn you are going to be cynical. Procurement people hate it when a salesperson calls up and says, I've been speaking to so-and-so, discussion seems to be going well. What do I need to do now? Because that sounds slightly presumptuous. And the procurement person, as I said a few minutes ago, is thinking competition. Have we scoured the market? What pricing have you been promising this? What story have you been telling to my business user? So they are going to be cynical, but at least early contact will give you the best fighting chance of getting over that to getting to the outcome you want.
Right. And so is a better approach for the salesperson to say, be very respectful to the role that procurement has and say, what can I do to help you in this process?
Absolutely. And perhaps something along the lines of, without being too, buttering people up, along the lines of, understand you're an important person in this whole process. Would very much like to get to understand about the process, about you personally. What is it we need to do to make sure that you are absolutely comfortable that we are the right organization with the right service for you? So something along those lines. What you shouldn't do, as I say, is come across as slightly presumptuous. Discussion's going well. It's going to lead inexorably to a sale, so you better get on board.
Yeah.
People wouldn't use that wording, but that's sometimes the implication from the discussion.
Yeah, of course. So coming back to what procurement cares about, for many in sales, we're working a deal. We've perhaps worked really hard to quantify the business value and perhaps the differentiating business value compared to the competition on the shortlist. And we're in this negotiation phase. I know there's multiple stages with procurement, and perhaps we can come back to that. But we're in this, what we think is the negotiation phase, because that's how we've been conditioned with regards to the role that procurement plays. But you don't really care about that business value per se, do you? As you've touched on, or do you?
It would be very remiss of me to say we don't care. Of course we do.
Yeah.
But I suppose, back to what I was saying almost at the start, if I'm working alongside someone who understands what they need, understands their budget, and ultimately is going to be accountable, then I guess I'm treating them as my SME. We're past the stage of knowing whether this is the right product or solution. I am now in the mode of absolutely making sure that we have got the best deals. Since you've talked about negotiation, at that stage, I am in the mode of making sure we've got the best pricing. And I make no bones. Personally, it was my personal mission to get the lowest price out of you. A price ideally below you thought you could ever even go. That was my personal mission.
Okay.
And I should quickly say, I always trusted that you would not go below what you required to make the deal work and to provide a good service.
So it was never personal towards the salesperson.
Oh, no.
You just wanted to make their life hell by negotiating
Well,
as hard as possible.
the thing is, Alex, yes, because most procurement people will say that negotiation is the part of the job that they love the most.
Yeah.
It might be something of an ordeal for the salesperson because they're being put through hoops. They want to get the deal done. You have to remember that for a procurement person, as I say, it's a fun game of cat and mouse. It's the part of the job they love the most. And of course, almost certainly they're going to have a savings target sitting behind them, which they need to achieve. And negotiating is one of the best ways they can achieve that.
Yeah.
Well, the only way usually.
Yeah. Let's we're jumping around a little bit, but I just want to come back to the scenario when procurement's leading, and that makes it very difficult for a salesperson who wants to try and take a bit of control in the deal, but also convince the business stakeholders of the value that they bring and how it's different to the competition. And often that means changing the requirements because typically a gap analysis, whatever the process is that a company goes through to identify where the gaps are and what needs filling by a supplier. They've not always had the right things in mind, especially if it's a technology purchase. What are we missing from a capability perspective as opposed to what are we missing from a revenue generation perspective? And that's where I think from my perspective, I always like to bring that different perspective to the conversation. But if procurement are leading the process and it's, batten down the hatches, these are the dates, this is the RFI, request for information, this is the RFP, request for proposal, don't speak to anyone other than me. I am God in this process. And that makes it really difficult. How bad is it if you do become aware that a salesperson is then continues to build relationships quickly to put themselves in a good position with a deal like that?
I mean, the scenario you paint there, I know it happens.
Right.
I could not imagine running an RFP without having a business stakeholder right beside me and having all those discussions. I think if you're faced as a sales organization with that situation and you've had no pre-discussions whatsoever, then you actually would need to think very hard about qualifying that RFP opportunity to decide, particularly if it's competing with others. Do you really want to invest all that time and money in it? Now, it could be, of course, that you are no greater disadvantage than any other of your competitors because nobody's had the chance. I think, without being too stereotypical, I'd like to think the private sector typically is more open to those discussions and perhaps changing the specification maybe partly during an RFP, or at least being open to other ideas. Public sector, I think, has a bit more of a reputation for being a little bit more rigid, and it's more difficult to go off piste and provide something because they are much more rigorous in their scoring mechanisms, and of course they can be open to a legal challenge, so they tend to be a little bit more conservative. That's a little bit stereotypical, but that's been my experience of having worked in both sectors, and that's what I hear from salespeople as well.
Okay, interesting. So what about so building upon that scenario? What's your view when a vendor, and it could be a very well-respected vendor, reviews the RFP, and it could be someone that you've thought they probably need to be on the list because their position in the marketplace, their success stories with other customers. What's your view if a vendor then decides on reading the RFP to actually take themselves out of the
Mm.
of the running for whatever reason, and there could be
Yeah.
valid reasons in there? Do you treat that with some respect, or do you say, do you think actually, forget them?
Yeah. Well, first thing to say is a lot of procurement people don't quite appreciate just how much time and effort is involved on the sales side.
Yeah,
And there's almost an arrogance of, well, everyone's fighting to be on an RFP list. How would they not want to respond? But to answer your question, it would depend on how likely we thought it was that there would be a really, really strong contender. Because to be very frank and cynical, if you've invited 5, 6 people and someone drops out, you could think, great, one less response to have to review.
yeah,
But clearly, if it's a major player, yes, I've been in situations where I've gone back and clearly you don't want to sort of be begging someone, and you can't give them you don't want to indicate to them too much that you're a really, really strong shoe-in for this, because then, of course, I'm going to lose competitive advantage in the negotiations. But no, I've been in that situation where I've said to someone, look, this is a genuinely open RFP where you have as good a chance as anyone, so we really would encourage you to bid. And then, of course, you try and understand the reasons why they didn't want to in the first place.
yeah, yeah. Because I've been at a company where we were laser focused in terms of who our ideal customer was, and therefore we would put a great deal of effort into winning that customer. And there was internal analysis done that it typically cost us $20,000 to run an engagement, a sales engagement, the way that we ran it. And if we weren't in early, the close rate, if we were just kind of added to the list and there was no prior engagement, the close rate's incredibly low, like 5% for a blind,
Yeah.
what we call a blind RFP in sales. I don't know if you call it the same in procurement. So it'd be very difficult to make that decision to actually be involved, with absolutely no idea that, you have a chance of winning.
I think again, and again, I don't mean to be too stereotypical. Public sector, because of the reasons I gave earlier, tend to be very, very, I won't use the word rigid, but very objective, scoring things very precisely. It is less easy to bring in previous discussions, previous experience. I'm a very strong believer in cultural fit, which can mean a myriad different things. But in the private sector, it's easier to bring those kind of factors in than it is in the public sector. So I think public sector, you are more likely to be able to win with relatively little prior engagement. I'm not talking here about really complex solutions, of course. Private sector, I would agree with you. And it doesn't surprise me at all that you said your win rate was much higher with those where you'd had that engagement than not.
Yeah, it kind of, I can't help but think businesses potentially end up making the wrong decision without knowing it, because the purchase process was so closed. But hey, will we ever know? So look, I just wanted to call out the comment here from Peter Button. Thank you. Yeah, no, we believe it's a very important topic, and I think anything that gives salespeople a competitive advantage is a good thing. It's obviously up to you, up to the audience, how you use this information that's kindly being shared by Michael. Let's look at some of the stages. So, what are some of the stages that procurement expect to engage with sales? And what are some of the common mistakes that sales professionals make in each of those stages?
Well, the first stage we've already talked about, which is the initial engaging with procurement.
Yeah, being
Typically,
proactive.
then, of course, you're at the submitting a proposal or an RFP.
Mm-hmm.
A few simple do's and don'ts. Just getting on the RFP list obviously can be a challenge. What I sometimes find is that a sales organization will have approached a procurement company, let's say 9 months ago, been told there's an RFP at, let's say, the end of the year, and they assume that they will be on the RFP list. Actually, in my experience, a lot of procurement departments are not that systematic. So staying in regular contact is important. A few of the basics, do's and don'ts with RFPs. Really try not to ask for an extension. I know it can sometimes be frustrating when you're given perhaps only a week or two and you feel you need longer, but that is very frustrating for procurement people who are obviously trying to coordinate a whole process and coordinate dates with their stakeholders and so on. The other piece of advice I would give is, even if you're told that we want a concise response, I would say on the side of being comprehensive. I've never heard a stakeholder say to me, the bid was far too long, it was far too much material in it. It's much more likely to hear people say, it was a bit thin, wasn't it? They're obviously not that interested. But I would follow up by saying, bear in mind the poor people who've got to review these half a dozen RFP responses. They're probably doing it at the end of a long day or even at the weekend. So try and get that balance between maybe concise answers in the core of your document, but then reference appendices with further detail if people want it. That way you're kind of getting the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
It's the Pearson law of procurement that somebody will always get the wrong client name in the RFP response. It's not the end of the world. I sometimes ask how important is that. It raises a joke. We know you use templates, so it's not the end of the world. But if somebody was on the edge of deciding whether you were the right company or not, that's just a small thing that could tip it over. So obviously proofread and be careful. Next stage, of course, is the presenting stage. And typically you do the RFP, you go down to a short list of 2 or 3. Some very practical do's and don'ts there. Make sure you have the right people in the room. I know it sounds obvious. The right number as well. The number of times there's been a veritable army turned up, and when I've asked the salesperson, well, why so many? And they say, well, we brought someone just in case. And that just in case person didn't say anything. So make sure everyone has a role. Have an identifiable leader of the team. Doesn't need to be the most senior person, but make sure it's coordinated. Keep to timings. Most people do on their presentation slot, but then when they're asked questions, they're rabbiting on and on and on, and you're losing time and you're going to lose goodwill. And the final thing I'd say on the presentation stage, obviously you're looking to build rapport, but it's like the X factor. It's kind of there or it's not, but you can at least help yourself, as I say, by the timing side. Try to keep your in-jokes to a minimum. We like to see rapport within the team, but don't over-egg it. Don't be distracted by the difficult person on the procurement side who's throwing you really difficult questions, because probably that's just their role to be obnoxious. So that's that kind of stage. And there's, let's say, some basic do's and don'ts there. Yeah. And then you've got the negotiation stage, which obviously we've talked about. I think if I was going to give just 1 or 2 pieces of advice, I've seen 2 extremes on you're going to get challenged by procurement people on pricing. We are never going to believe your first price is the best price. We're always going to challenge you. And yet it never fails to surprise me how some salespeople seem surprised at the challenge, and they stumble and stutter, and they say inane things like, well, all our other clients are happy with the pricing, or my other clients wouldn't be happy if I gave you a better price. At the other extreme, I get to see people who are very inflexible. What I would advise, I think the best response when you're challenged is along the lines of, we've given a lot of thought to our proposal. We feel it's fair and reasonable, but I hear your concerns. So I have to structure expectations. We probably haven't got too much we can give, but let's see how we can work on it. That you're kind of covering all bases. You're not appearing too inflexible, but you're structuring expectations that there's probably not too much to give away here. The other little tip I'd give is, do ask for specifics. So if you're just told by procurement, you need to reduce the price. Yeah. almost certainly that pricing is going to have a number of elements. Probe and ask where. Because if you're just told, oh, just look at the whole lot, doesn't really matter, that would indicate that procurement are just on a fishing exercise to see what saving they can get. And actually, you've probably already got the deal. Similarly, if you offered to reduce the specification to reduce the price, the response you get from procurement, again, can give you a bit of insight. How important is the price? Because if the procurement person leaps on that and says, yeah, that would be great, let's work together on this, that would suggest that the cost really is an issue. If procurement insists that, no, we want to keep the spec the same, even without referring to their stakeholder, again, that would suggest they're just on a fishing exercise. Because don't forget, if I'm negotiating with you, I would say in the majority of cases, it means my business stakeholder likes your service. They like you as a company. Your price is probably already in the right ballpark. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be bothering to negotiate with you. So you probably have got more strength and power than you may realize.
Yeah. And actually, I guess at that stage, then the less the salesperson says, the better, because you just want an outcome, a reduced price. What timeline? Is there a timeline in your mind when it comes to negotiation, Michael?
So we are always trained as procurement people that the people who want to get the deal quickest will be the people who capitulate earliest.
Yeah.
But of course, the salesman's going to have a month end, a quarter end, a year end breathing down their neck. From the procurement side, we've got a business stakeholder breathing down our neck who really wants to get on with the deal. So typically, I would argue that probably the more of the power is with procurement. We probably are more able to just go quiet for a few days and leave the other side sweating than the other way around. Although I would say, ironically, salespeople probably don't always realize it. If they suddenly went quiet, in many cases, the procurement person would suddenly start to worry because, as I say, they've got a business stakeholder saying, when's the deal? When are we going to get it done?
Yeah. Nice. That's great advice. That's great advice, I think, to end on. We've come to the end of time. Michael, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you for sharing your insight and your experience with us.
Well, okay.
For our audience that want to learn more about you, where can they find you? How can they engage with you?
Yep. So LinkedIn, of course, I have a profile there, and my organization's website is www.insidetheprocurementmind.com. And I as hopefully has come across, I'm passionate about this subject. I love talking about it, and always happy to talk to anyone.
Brilliant, brilliant. And Peter, thank you for your engagement this morning. Some great comments and great points. Well, until next time on Sales TV, I would like to wish everyone a wonderful rest of week and Christmas ahead. Take care all. Bye-bye.
Bye.